rebuild the state, especially in the aftermath of something like Lincoln's death. So I want to move to the second part of my remarks now. I want to focus on what's going on in West Virginia. And what we will see is that the assassination made it even more difficult for former Unionists and former Confederates, and they are both numerous within the state, to begin to live together again after the war. Now, for Unionists within West Virginia, Lincoln has a very special place in their hearts, not least because he's the guy who signs the statehood bill into law. So it's very natural for them to join Dusenberry, who we started with, in mourning Lincoln's death. If you look at papers like the Wheeling Intelligencer, for example, you will see lengthy editorials in the weeks after the assassination expressing the grief of the community. One of them read, "We have no words to express the thrill of horror which ran through this community last Saturday evening on receipt of the news announcing the murder of the president. Men seemed stunned and utterly dispossessed of any ability to do or say anything commensurate with their silent feelings. A great spell of depression pervaded all the streets, businesses shut down, every house in the city wore insignia of mourning." Unionists express similar sentiments in other ways. Some of them write in their diaries, like Dusenberry. Other people meet with their neighbors in town meetings, in churches, and courthouses across the state. They pass resolutions denouncing the assassination as a crime of inhuman character, an act of treason and bloodshed, and so forth. People in West Virginia also show their grief in more concrete ways. Some of them work to support victims of Booth's conspiracy, including a soldier named Sergeant George F. Robinson, who had actually saved William Seward's life. He'd been on duty within Seward's house. He'd been badly stabbed, and he had been hurt very badly in the arm and in the shoulder. Residents of Wheeling launched a fundraising drive to help defray his medical costs and to support him during his recovery. They collected 25-cent donations at polling places throughout the city and held a public gathering at the courthouse. Other Unionists within West Virginia respond less constructively to the news by venting their rage through acts of violence or threats of violence against former Confederates. We see considerable violence as Confederate and Union veterans return home, sometimes to the same communities. So we have evidence of attacks on Confederate veterans in Martinsburg, in Marion County, the attack in Barbersville I mentioned, and elsewhere. Some of these Confederate veterans themselves showed little desire to reconcile. Several of them were arrested for desecrating U.S. flags and an Independence Day celebration in Ravenswood. So there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of hostility. And as people are coming together to rebuild these communities, Lincoln's assassination adds fuel to the fire. And this might help to explain one of the most widespread responses by West Virginia Unionists to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And that is their desire to prevent Confederate veterans from returning home at all. This was one of the most common responses. Simply put, in the spring of 1865, a lot of Unionists vowed to prevent Confederate veterans from returning anywhere to the Mountain State at all. If we turn again to the Wheeling Intelligencer, 9 days after Lincoln's death, you can get a sense of where they're coming from on this. This is a quotation. "The day may perhaps come, after the war is all over, after the wounded popular feeling shall have healed, when such persons," meaning former Confederates, "can modestly settle down into retired life among us, but that time is not now. At present, the sight of them is simply inflammatory to the people and promotes the highest degree of active opposition. The friends of unreturned rebels should notify them and tell them plainly that their surest and best home is in Dixie or else in the towns and cities of the North where the people don't know them." So the message is clear. Confederates ought to either move further south among like-minded people or move to the north where nobody knows them. But they must not return to their former homes, their former communities, and live alongside their former neighbors who had been their enemies in the war. And if you look at newspapers from across the state, especially in April and May 1865, you will see Unionists holding public meetings in churches and courthouses and other public places where they pass resolutions saying the same thing. Don't want these guys coming back here. I have found evidence of them in the counties that are marked on your map. Taylor, Marshall, Randolph, Brooke, Pleasance, Harrison, Tyler, Preston, Mongalia, Ritchie, Kanawha, Braxton, Ohio, and Upshur counties, and undoubtedly there were others that I don't have evidence of. Some of the meetings were held by Union soldiers. Most of them were held by civilians. Some of them would make exceptions for men who'd been conscripted into the Confederate Army. Most of them did not. But they all very clearly and directly stated that Confederate volunteers were not welcome. They usually don't specify how this will be enforced. It's more of a saying something should be done rather than coming up with a concrete plan. But some of them did organize vigilance committees, and one gets the sense that they were willing to use force to carry out their plans. For our purposes, though, the most striking thing about these is the way that they always connected the Lincoln assassination to this issue of what to do about returning Confederate veterans. If we use an example from Taylor County to look at, they begin by passing resolutions denouncing the assassination and the attack on Seward, and then they move straight into their opposition to the returning Confederate veterans. They hint that violence might erupt if this happens, and that the Confederates would be responsible for it. So the key here is that in the minds of folks who had supported the Union and who were mourning the death of Lincoln, his death is directly related to how they're going to get along, or try to not get along, with neighbors who may have fought for the Confederacy. Now this put the U.S. government in a very difficult position. The biggest problem was how to handle the men who had surrendered with Lee at Appomattox, because according to the terms of that surrender, they're supposed to get to go home. And they're supposed to get kind of free passage. That doesn't apply to everybody. Not everybody who's coming back to West Virginia surrendered at Lee. In fact, some of them never surrendered at all. But the key here is that there's this very big gap between the terms that Ulysses S. Grant has offered and Lee has accepted, and the desire of West Virginia Unionists. This is going to put them on a collision course with U.S. policymakers. So they try to bring some order out of the chaos. The key man here for making this decision is a Major General named William H. Emory, who is commander of the Department of West Virginia. In early May, he issues a couple of different proclamations explaining how he wants to handle the situation, and he basically offers the former Confederates a kind of a carrot and a stick. The carrot is that if they come back to West Virginia and they abide by the law, state and federal law, then they can go home. The stick is if they don't give themselves up soon, like within days, they will not be considered prisoners of war, they will be arrested as bandits, and they will be tried as such. So he's offering a threat, but he's also offering a return home, and he will see to it that they be allowed to return home. So he sends a warning to Unionists who don't want them to do so. In effect, this order puts West Virginia in the same category as former Confederate states. It's a lawful destination for Confederates returning home. They don't need any special permission to do so. Now, the Unionists in the Mountain State are outraged by this. They're not happy with the decision. They immediately go to the governor, Arthur Borman, and they say, you've got to do something to change this policy. We don't want these guys to return here. They continue to hold meetings denouncing Confederate veterans and saying that the presence of traitors in their community, as they put it in one, will not be tolerated. They don't get what they want. Governor Borman tries, he talks with members of Congress, he talks with the Army. He can't get them to change their policy. By May 27th, this is all happening within weeks, he issues a public message to the citizens of his state, urging them to uphold the law. He tells former Confederates, you've got to abide by the law, you've got to respect statehood, and he tells the Unionists, you've got to let these guys return to their homes. And he reminds them that if they defy Union authority here, then they will be essentially rebelling against the United States. And if you're a Unionist, you've refused to do that during the war, so don't do it now. Don't do it now that the war is over. So they come back. And there's years and years to work out that tension that results. So this ends the first round of conflict over how to rebuild a state that is not only born out of the war, but is also torn apart by it. It's also deeply divided by it. It's not the last. There's similar conflicts until 1872 about what to do with giving ex-Confederates the right to vote. This will be a hotly debated issue. For many years after that, there's public debates about how to commemorate the conflict. One of my students in our master's program is doing research on how the war is commemorated in Huntington, and he's got veterans stealing each other's statues and dragging them to the city dump for scrap metal. He's got all kinds of good stories, so keep an eye out for that, because hopefully he'll publish something about it. But the key here is that all of this, I think, would have happened even if Lincoln had lived to a ripe old age and died at home in bed. But given the unique challenges of rebuilding a unique state like West Virginia, Lincoln's murder clearly made the road to reconciliation even longer and even more dangerous for those who had to travel it. Thank you. Any questions?
Spider in the belt.
Thank you. You know, when I saw you come in, I thought, that's the guy who's going to ask. Yeah, so here's the irony of this. We have this threat coming from a Confederate sympathizer telling him he's going to do this. The origins of the threat probably go to West Africa, and this concept probably comes over in the slave trade. It's probably related to a West African conjuring practice in which the idea is you can put spider eggs into a piece of food that someone will eat, like a dumpling. And when they eat it, if you put the right spell or whatever on it, the eggs will actually hatch inside their body, and they will have spiders within them, and it will kill them from inside. So this guy who wrote this probably didn't know that that's where it came from. I would bet. But it took him a while to track this down. But my guess is that that's where it came from. And it's not in very common usage. You don't see it used all that much then. Thank you. Yeah.
While there were all of these threats of assassinations for Lincoln, were there ever any toward Davis?
There are people who want to kidnap him. And there are Union expeditions that one of their possible missions would be they want to raid into Richmond if they can get in, liberate prisoners of war, and maybe kidnap him, like out of his home. Don't know of plots to kill him, but it would surprise me if there weren't. The question is, what kind of records do we have of them now? Because anything that's word of mouth, we're not going to know about. Yeah.
I'm not from West Virginia, but my feel for West Virginia is more of a southern state than a Union state. And I'm wondering, how unified was West Virginia in seceding from Virginia and becoming part of
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, the entire South is pretty deeply divided by this, actually. I mean, there are counties in northern Alabama that threaten to secede from Alabama because they don't support secession. So it's not really unified anywhere. But it's especially divided in a state like this one in like Kentucky and Maryland and Missouri, where it's really, really messy. Generally, the further north that you go in the state and the further west that you go in the state. So the Ohio River counties tend to be more Unionist. The northern Panhandle tends to be more Unionist. The further south and the further east that you go tends to be more Confederate. But the trick is, if you look at these resolutions, it's pretty clear that there's a lot of veterans from both sides returning throughout the state. And that's why it becomes so difficult. But yeah, the process of statehood is a complete mess. And even where to draw the boundaries of the state is, in some cases, rather arbitrary. So that's a whole other talk in and of itself. Yeah.
Are there any statistics available on how many of the Confederate soldiers stayed in West Virginia?
After the war?
Yes.
No one has studied that. You could do it with census records. We know there's probably 10,000 to 15,000 of them who serve in the Confederate Army in one respect or another. So it would be a pretty big undertaking. My guess is that a majority would return because they'd have to start over someplace else, and their family is probably in the area. But on the other hand, if they're getting this message of don't come back here, especially if they're from a more Unionist area, like it would be very difficult to return to Wheeling, for example, or Parkersburg, then they may not. But to my knowledge, no one has studied actually how many do make the return. It's clear that a lot of them want to, though, because their presence is commented on by Unionists. They see these guys coming back. And actually, tricky, one of the things is they don't know if they've actually surrendered or not. Right? Have they given up, or are they guerrillas coming to burn your barn? You know, you don't know. That's a good question. I should make one of my graduate students do Yes.
Is this Thomas Harris the one who founded Harrisville in Ritchie County?
You know, I have been asked that before, and I think that he's not. but I think he's from the family. Yeah.
I don't remember the first one.
Yeah, that has come up before, and my knowledge about that is, I would guess that the community predates him, but it would seem likely that he is related to those who did. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Booth was a white supremacist.
Yes.
Is that a more polite term for KKK? Or is that a faction of that?
The Klan is not founded until 1866, so
Okay.
Booth would have sympathized with their aims of preventing blacks from voting, for example, in one of their key projects. But his wartime writings make it very, very clear where he's coming from on this, and so emancipation in and of itself outrages him, but the idea then of suffrage is for black men is just appalling to him, and his diaries made that very clear. He wrote a letter that was published in a newspaper that kind of outlines his thinking on this. And in some ways, people had taken the threat more seriously. They might have wondered if he was planning something with respect to the president.
Is there any truth to the theory that Lincoln was in bad health to begin with and that he was close to death when he was assassinated?
You can look at photographs of him taken over the course of the war and see a kind of a physical decline in some ways. I mean, the war had taken a very, very hard toll on him. But he wasn't all that old. He was born in 1809, so he's only 56 in 1865. So I don't think he was on the verge of death before Booth shot him. There's never any doubt that he would have survived a second term. Had he been in such ill health that he may not have lived through his second term, it's possible that his party may not have renominated him. You see that happen with other presidents of that era where they say, we're not sure about him.
You said that Booth left the theater, went to a pub to have a few drinks.
Yes.
Didn't Lincoln's personal bodyguard, do the same thing?
Well, Lincoln's only guard at Ford's Theater was actually a courier who is there just to bring him news. Because the war's still going. Lee has surrendered, but there's other Confederate forces in the field. So he has to be in contact with other people. But he actually confronts Booth when Booth is trying to go up into the presidential box. And Booth just hands him his calling card and says, yeah, I'm J. Wilkes Booth. And nobody thinks anything of it because he's so well known there and he has performed there. So it seems normal that he would be there. Lincoln, compared to presidents now, is woefully, underguarded, but they hadn't completely dropped the ball on that.
You kind of mentioned about how the assassination embittered the Unionists against the returning Confederates.
Yeah.
Do you think the assassination emboldened the Confederates who were returning to give them to be more confrontational in a way?
If they are returning to areas where they're in the majority, it could. But there are also those who are, if they see that, saying sort of hurrah for Booth or something might provoke a violent attack, it could also make them really nervous, right? They know that this will make it even more dangerous. So I'd say it depends on where exactly they're going and just how predominant they think that they are. There's also a sense that no one really knows what Andrew Johnson's policy will be. And so there are Confederates who are very nervous about him. He's from Tennessee, but he had supported the Union throughout the war. And he had made very, very strong comments earlier about taking all the land from the planters, who he blamed for secession, and giving it mostly to Union soldiers, or hanging a bunch of the Confederate high command. So he had initially seemed like a much more radical figure than Lincoln. He changed his course immediately once he is sworn into office, but there's a lot of concern about what he will do. So that might have dampened any of their kind of enthusiasm at that point. Any questions? Thanks.
This natural air condition don't work too well.
Well, thanks very much, folks.
Thank you.